So this is going to be the very first artwork feedback video. So the reason we're doing this is because we've hit a milestone on my Patreon, which means we would open a new tier. And the new tier, which is the new top tier at $8, is going to offer monthly art feedback videos not in plural, but like one video. So all of the legends, it's called the legend tier. All of the legends each month can submit their art, one piece of art, to a pool of arts. And then I select, personally, handpick up to 8 of those art pieces in the pool. And I put them in a poll to the other legends in the community so they can vote which one they want me to give feedback on. And I estimate that these videos are going to be like 30 to 40 minutes long. And when you upload your art as a legend, I also ask you what are the 1 to 3 things that you struggle with in your piece, because that's what we're going to focus on in the piece when I give feedback. And the way I'm going to do this is just I'm going to look at the piece, I'm going to point out things where I think there is room for improvement. I'm going to do it in a very constructive manner. So I'll also show you how I would implement these changes. Mind you, if I would have to change the entire piece, it would take hours, and I have half an hour. So I'm not going to do an entire repaint or paint over of the pieces, but I will show you how technically and theoretically you can implement the changes. And in these videos we're also going to talk about a lot of theoretical stuff. It's kind of just goes hand in hand with the feedback. So if there's something with composition or color, we'll talk about why, not just tell you, no, pick red instead of blue, but why red would be better than blue, blah, blah, blah. So this is the demo video, which means as of right now, these artwork feedback videos are limited to my patrons only, and the legends specifically. So the demo you'll watch here now on YouTube is just that, a demo. So if you're into this kind of stuff and you would like to be able to submit your art to the pool, head over to my Patreon and become a legend today. So for the demo video, I asked my entire Patreon community to submit their art for feedback, and I put out the artwork in a poll on my Patreon, and the community voted that this is going to be the piece that I'll do some feedback on today by crisgvart or crisgvart. Not sure how to pronounce it, but it's this one. So make sure to check her out. She's really awesome, and there's definitely a lot of awesome stuff going on in this painting. So what she wrote in the submission form when she submitted this piece is that she had a hard time figuring out the perspective, and she also struggled a bit with the values. So those are the 2 main things that we'll be looking at today. And while I am not really an expert in perspective, I can give some guidelines to what can be done when building up a picture like this. But I think actually mostly what I'm going to focus on are the values, because that is the first thing that I noticed about this picture. So you can tell immediately that it's a pretty ambitious piece. And I also know that this was an entry piece to get into an art academy online, and she got in. So congratulations. It's really awesome. So first I'm going to hide this Instagram handle here. And I think the first thing we're going to address are the values. So there are a lot of awesome colors going on in this image, and I see there are actually some really great contrast. If you're wondering what I mean when I refer to values, values is the spectrum of light and black in an image. So the relationship between how much light there is in the image and how much dark there is. And you can actually in Photoshop see this if you go into view. I think, is it window? It's window, and go to histogram. And on the channel here, you pick luminosity. So it just looks at the white and the black pixels. So even though you have color going on here, I'll just color pick a blue color here. If you see out here in the wheel, it's in the grayscale, it's this tone here. And if I pick the cloud here, you can see that it goes lighter. So when we look at the entire image and its luminosity, you can see here that there's actually a spectrum out here to the right that almost doesn't have any pixels. And that's because the artist has used very little white in the image. So there are actually almost no values from around this area, or maybe this area, and up to extreme white. So that means that the majority of the values in the image fall between approximately here and down here. You can also look at this one, brightness here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a split view. And you can do this by clicking Window and Arrange and say New Window for whatever you call your Photoshop file. And now you'll see we have two instances of the same image. I'll just drag this one out and dog it over to the left if I can, please. Please do it. Yeah, yes, okay. Just going to just size here. No, that's fine, just leave it here. And then what I'm going to do on the left one is I'm going to preview it in grayscale. I do that by going to View, Proof Setup, and I have one here called Grayscale, but you can just go up to Custom if it's not there, pick Grayscale, whoop, and just S-Gray, I think it's the standard option, and then hit OK. And then now you can turn it off with Control Y, like this. Turn it off and on. So what you probably notice happened immediately when I turn this on over here is that there is not a lot of contrast between the warrior and the background. If you look at the color pictures, it looks like there is actually in fact a lot of contrast because there are a lot of contrasting colors, also known as hues, but in the values, in the grayscale relationship, there isn't much contrast. It almost looks like the sky here has the same value as the hair. It doesn't entirely, but it's not far from. So there isn't really a lot of contrast going on. And I might be wrong, but I think this warrior is this piece's main focus. So we should definitely have her stand out more, so she actually appears to be the focus of the painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut her out so we can play a little with her without affecting the surrounding areas. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to duplicate my layer just by dragging it down onto the new layer option. And then I'm going to take my magic wand tool and I'm holding shift to select more. Whoops, you can see kind of here. Where is my button? Wait. There we go. You can see in this area here that the magic wand tool actually also grabs like the arm. That's because the magic wand tool selects pixel based on contrast. And because the contrast isn't so high and the tolerance up here is quite high too, it's picking the arm too. So the way we can do this is by just decreasing the tolerance, let's say 10. And now it doesn't select because the contrast tolerance is much lower. So I'm going to just select her as best as I can. And there are some areas where I pick too much or too little. I'll just pick the lasso tool and just select the last bits. So now that I have a lot of the character selected, we'll actually have the outside of the character selected. I'll just finish up this by quickly adding all of it to my selection. There. I will invert the selection by hitting Control I. No, that was not Control I. Control Alt-I, not Control-Shift-I. Yeah, Control-Shift-I. All of these shortcuts. And then now I have like only the selection of the character, right? So I'm going to right click and say new layer with copy. So you can see out here I created a new layer with only this elf on. But we can't really do anything with her yet because there's still this elf behind. So I'm going to reapply the selection by holding Control and clicking on the thumbnail of the elf. Then I get the active selection back. And this layer appears hidden now. And on this layer where I want to remove the elf, I'm going to edit and choosing content aware fill. So I am testing Photoshop to see if it can remove the elf. Yeah, it kind of removed her a little bit. I think we can just... Then I'm going to hit OK. And the rest here, I think we can just lightly, for the sake of this... going to merge these down. For the sake of just this video, I think I'll just manually paint over. So hold tight while I repair the background. Okay, I know that isn't the prettiest, and I definitely didn't do anything good for the picture, but now we have our elf flying in here from the side, and she's cut out so we can do whatever we want with her. So remember we looked at these histograms, right? That there are actually not really any pixels over here on the right. So the first thing I'll be doing is I'll add some contrast to the elf, and only the elf. So I go down here in the menu on the adjustment layers button, and I select something that brings contrast, which is basically all of these four here, but I really like to work with the curves, so that's just my personal preference. And I'll make sure that the adjustment layer is clipping down to the elf. Now I can adjust this curve and play around with the elf. Now, if you notice, just by making the picture a bit darker over here, you can see there's already a lot more contrast going on over here on the left side. So I'm going to play a bit with these sliders. I don't want her to be too contrasty either. Don't want to ruin whatever idea was. But as you can see now, the light areas are actually now a lot lighter, you can see here, and the dark areas are a lot darker, which makes over here a lot better contrast. And just for comparison, here's the original and here is the new one. So there is a bit more contrast now, and we can add more by adding some more lighting effects to these areas here. But first I want to move the elf just a little bit because she is very close to the edge. And if you ever try to divide your canvas into rules of thirds, you can do that pretty easily actually. If you go to view and select new guide layout, you can make 3 columns and 3 rows, and then you have a grid that supports the rule of thirds. And right now the focus of the warrior is right here in her chest. And I believe we should maybe draw more attention to either her head, the effects on her hands, or her sword. So I'm going to move her a bit. Wait. There. I'm going to move her a bit so that now at least this line here is going straight across her face. And the crosshair is closer to the face than to the armor. And I can also change the perspective there a little bit by rotating her and move her a little more away from the edge, because whatever is close to the edge is not something we naturally focus on. So the sword kind of got hidden up here, and I know this is maybe a cheap little what's it called, like edit, but if I took the sword here, selected it and hit Ctrl T. Wait, I want actually it on a new layer, so I'm cutting it out. So I removed it from there And I'm going to move it behind the other layer. Whoops. Yeah, okay. So now you can see we have 2 layers here. And we have the curved layer. It doesn't know which one it should clip down to. So what we can do is we can take these 2 layers with the elf, put into a folder, and have the the adjustment layer clip down to the folder. Where is it? There we go. So everything inside this folder is now affected by that adjustment. Why can't I click this? There we go. So what I can do here now is I can try to move the sword a little. Whether you want it behind or in front of her hair, it's up to you, personally. And I'm going to hide the grid now by hitting Ctrl H. And this is the original. And this is the one that I am playing with at the moment. So if you ask me, there's a lot more focus now away from the edge and more like in the center of the image. She actually takes up 4 of these 9 spaces, so she holds a lot of the spaces. So she is in much more focus now. And the artist here actually already had some really good contrast going on in the fact that the sky up here in this area is much darker than the sky down here. And on the top of the elf we have this bright sword. So there's a really pleasing natural contrast between the sword's blade and the sky. So that's really, really good. I'm going to hide the grid over here as well. So now that we have moved her more into the center and adjusted her values alone, if you look at the histogram over here, like we did before, it's just the top one you're supposed to look at. Don't look at the bottom ones, just the top one. With the original, there was kind of like a lot of peaks over here in the dark area and not a light over in the white, and to the light area there were kind of not a lot compared to in the dark area. I forgot to mention that to the left is dark pixels and to the right are light pixels, okay? If I hide the original and looking at the new one I pang, you can see that out here by the far right you can now see the addition of very, very bright white pixels to the image. It's kind of like this little thing, I don't remember what it's called. And compared to the original, the spectrum here with the brighter pixels also have a lot more. So we have a lot more balanced relationship between light and dark pixels in the image. But we still don't really have a lot over here in the white. And we can add some by adding some rim lights, which will also look really good in this kind of light setting that is created. So I imagine this here is the sun behind the mountains going, I'm not sure if this is an up or down. I would say down, but I'm not sure. And we also have some really cool fire going on here that we can add some light to even out the histogram even more. And I'm just going to create a new layer on top of everything else. I'm going to pick some kind of yellow, orange yellow, and I'm going to pick my airbrush. And just to make things a bit easier, I'm just going to select overlay as my blending mode for this layer. So when I paint, you can see it becomes a lot brighter. So what I can do first is I can make the selection of my elf and her sword. I can hide the selection while keeping it active by going to View and Extras. Wait, that brings up the grid because it was hidden, but if I hit it now, everything is gone, but the selection still works, right? So I'm going to just give her a little bit of that light coming from behind her, from the sun, like this. The sword too, and she's probably also going to be hit there. This is very loosely done, okay? Just so you get the idea of why I'm doing this and what I'm doing. And there's also going to be some light. And see, she also already has some rim lights going on, which is super nice. They're correctly located and everything. And now for the rest of the image, I'm just going to remove the selection and hide my grid. And I'm going to adjust the brush size. Just add a few more lighting effects. And just because fire light is actually very, 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 very bright, I'm going to add a new layer with a very small brush, just the center of the fire, giving it a little more like that. Yes. And then I want to actually add some sharp rim lights, because as you can see here with this goblin guy down here, his shield is kind of in front of behind the mountains from the light, but there's still some light emitting from here, so naturally he wouldn't be in a lot of light, but adding that rim light to that shield will help create some contrast. Because if you look over here now in the grayscale and I zoom out, you can't even really see the shield. Even if I go a little further, you might notice there's something there, but you're not really thinking about it because there isn't really any contrast. Your eye just don't naturally pick out this. Most likely your eye is going to look at the sword here, then the character and her face and her arm here, and then this area here where there's a lot of contrast. So we're going to add some contrast to this goblin by adding some rim lights all over actually. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pick a nice color for the rim lights, and I like to kind of just pick the brightest color there is from the light source. I'm picking rim lights off and making it a bit lighter. And I think for this, I'm going to check, can I use this one? I think I'll just pick Carl's Drawing Box Animator pencil. I'm going to zoom in to give me some control. Going to make this a little smaller, and then I'll just paint in the rim lights manually. I'm not saying this is going to be a beautiful rim light paint job, but you get the idea, right? And down here to the shield, as I talked about, I'm just going to follow the edge here. The rim light. It's not perfect half circle, but it's something. And as you can see down here just before pinning, she actually already had some rim light going on there. I just think it should be emphasized more to create much more contrast in the image. And she also has, look here, she has some really nice rim lights here going on. I just think they could be brighter to kind of show a lot more of this amazing goblin character down here. And I think the perspective is probably meant to be the way that he is in the shadow zone of this shield here. But even though an object is in shadow, you can still add rim lights to it. Because in this case we have the fire light here. That's probably still going to hit him. So while these rim lights may not be perfect, I'm going to say it again, you probably get the idea. I'm going to pick another rim light for this bottom here, because of the fire. And I think I overdid it a bit here. Here we go. Excuse me. So I put some rim lights on the guy, and if you look over here in the grayscale view, now it's much more easy to see what's going on because we have some contrasting values. And I mean, I just did like a really quick rim light job here. You can really go into detail with this and also add some other cool lighting effects, but I think we did make him stand out. And in terms of overall composition and values, I think I want to mention a few things that are really easy to have in mind when you build up a picture, and that we can actually also quickly fix on this image. And that is looking into also kind of like the perspective thing. There's this thing called atmospheric perspective. An atmospheric perspective simply refers to the fact that things that are farther away from us, like the mountains in the background, right? They are absorbed more in the color of the atmosphere. So if we have a blue sky and we have some brown mountains. The longer away the mountains are, the bluer they become because they're submerged in the atmosphere. So what we can do to create some really great depth in this image is to give these mountains some atmospheric perspective. And we'll do that by selecting the mountains. I'm going to use my magic wand tool once again to loosely select mountains. And I actually don't want to pick up, whoops, the fire there. So I think I need to go in with my lasso tool. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new layer under the elf layer. I'm going to mask my selection, so now I can only draw on the selection I have because it masked to my layer, okay? And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pick up the color of the sky that's here with my big airbrush. I'm going to paint lightly over the mountain. I'm going to pick up the atmosphere around the mountain. So you can see it's pretty crisp here because my selection isn't perfect, but never mind that. It's just my horrible selection. And if you think you overdid it a bit, you can always turn down the opacity just a bit. So this is basically just a very quick fix to create some more depth in the image by adding some atmospheric perspective. And I know obviously because my selection wasn't perfect that there's some pixels here, please just ignore that. I don't have time to fix every single pixel, but yeah, you know, that you get the idea, right? Another thing we can do to add a lot more depth in the image, it's using overlapping objects. I actually already did it a bit with the elf here. You can see how her toe down here kind of intersects over the mountain. So things that are in the foreground are naturally closer to you. So if I'm standing in front of you, you expect the chair I'm sitting on to be behind me, right? So I'm overlapping the chair, but you still know it's there, right? So we're actually going to remove some of the mountains because I want this goblin shield to not be behind the mountains, but I want it to be over because it creates a lot more depth in the image. So now I'm going to lower or raise some of the mountains. So what I just did was I painted over this area. I know it's not super pretty the way that I did it, but as you can see, the mountain kind of stops here and kind of continues down here, right? So now the shield is clearly in front of the mountains. And if we go back to the original, you can see over here in the grayscale that the goblin is kind of he's trapped down in this big dark area towards the bottom of the painting. Whereas in the new version, you can much better start to map out his silhouette here. So that just gives some really nice perspective. Also because the perspective considered, because I think what is supposed to happen here, I'm going to create a new layer and create some guidelines, okay? I'm not a perspectives master. Please don't kill me if I say something that doesn't make entirely sense, but we have a warped perspective here, right? It's not like just a straight line. We have a warped, rounded perspective, and I imagine that she's supposed, because the way that the mountain is, the castle is going up like this, there might be some frog perspective going on, right? So we're actually looking down from his perspective, maybe a little farther up and up to this elf, right? So it would make sense that the grid is very compressed here and it grows bigger as we go up like this. I know that isn't pretty, but I hope you know what I mean. So with that in mind, it is also very natural that his shield should in fact be a lot higher compared to the background, because we're kind of seeing it from below or down. And another little tip to how we can create more depth in the image, because there is actually a lot of elements in the image. We have a foreground of 2 characters and a ground and some assets here on the ground, right? Then in the mid section of the image, we have like a whole war here going on, and behind that are the castle walls and the castle, and behind that further away we have the mountains, right? So what we can do to create more sense of depth, if we can create a fake lens blur. So basically what that means is when you take a picture with your camera and you select the thing you want to focus on, often the surrounding areas are being blurred out a bit, and that's the effect that we're going to fake in this image to create more depth in the image. It's going to be a bit hard without cutting it all out. So I think I need to cut out the image in sections. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to merge the backgrounds here. So I have one solid background with the goblin and everything. Then what do we have here? Those were lighting effects, more lighting effects, and rim light, right? Yes, that's alright, that's alright. We just need to cut out the background. So I'll return in a second when I have cut out the background using just the lasso tool. As I'm doing this right now, I actually noticed there are a lot of little like strands of grass all over this foreground area. But they're really hard to notice because they kind of blend in with the background. So I'll try and see if I can do something to make them more noticeable, because I see they actually do have some shading, they have some rim light, which is really good. I just think they need to be a bit brighter, and then it will look a lot more noticeable. So now that I've cut out the mountains, castle, wall and gate, and foreground, and the character of course, I'm just going to use these as references, because for the convenience of just playing with the different layers in the image, I have decided to cut them out like this. And the first thing we're going to blur are the mountains, because they're furthest away. I'm just going to select those, be on the layer I want to blur it on, go to filter, select blur and Gaussian blur. I'm not going to overdo it. Maybe like 3, around 3 is good. So you can see now that the mountains are blurred in the background, and I'm going to give a little blur to the castle as well. I'm just going to expand my selection, otherwise I won't have much to blur from, like this, but I'm going to exclude, I'm going to exclude this one called War and Gate, as you can see. And I'm going to hit filter, select the right layer of course, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to set this one on 2, I think, like this. So now you have the mountains blurred out the most, the castle next most, I can't talk anymore. And then I'm going to select this war and gate to be the last one to get blurred. And I'm just going to do the same and go to filter, blur, select, modify and expand. I need to expand my selection. I only want to expand with 35 this time. I'm going to exclude the foreground, and then I'm going up to filter, blur and Gaussian blur, and I'm only going to blur this with 1, and there you have it. Now you have a very clear sense of depth in the image. You have the foreground, which is super sharp, you have the semi-sharp midground, the castle and the mountain as the backgrounds. I know I kind of messed up the fire there, it looked so good before I got started, I'm so sorry. I'll try if I can correct it. So there are just some tiny little things I would do to optimize. This little skull here is very noticeable. So I would actually bring down the brightness on this one. And I do that by making a selection, going to image, adjustments, and I think I will choose brightness contrast for this one and turn down the brightness. So it doesn't stand out as much as before. So this is the original image and this is the one I'm working on. So the original and the one I'm working on. And I'm just going to add some extra little highlights. And I'm also selecting this guy's back leg just to darken it a bit, because there isn't almost any contrast between this area of the leg going behind the other one, and it will be naturally more in shadow. So I'll just add some shadow to it there, so you can better differentiate between the two legs before and after. And lastly, in terms of values, I'm just going to give this grass that I noticed a bit of strokes along with the along with the other part of the foreground here. And lastly, if this was my piece, a thing I really like to do is adding some shading from the sun or the light source in the sky to the cloud. So I would create something like this to contrast the clouds more. I'm just blurring it out now so you can see, especially especially the ones very close to the light source. And now I'm just adding some more lighting effects to those areas. And very lastly, in terms of this perspective, what I think I would have done here is to use a perspective tool to get the pose from the angle that you want, and then later add some kind of perspective grid. I think what I would have done if I would have used my trusted companion, Design Doll, and I would have sculpted this pose and screenshotted it and used the perspective grid available. So this is Design Doll, and this is just an empty clay doll, and you can just create it however you want. I want bigger boobs, I want more saggy boobs, I want the hands to do this and that, blah blah blah. And as you can see from in here, let's see if I can. So you can use Design Doll like this to kind of like try and create the pose that you really want. I personally have a very hard time replicating poses that I see in images, so don't mind that it looks a bit off, because one thing is how it looks from one perspective when she looks kind of like yippee from other angles, but you can like play around with this until you get the pose just right. But imagine there's a sword here and she's looking down on you like, yeah, what do you want? I'm gonna smack you with my shield. I mean my sword. Sword, not my soul, not my shield. I'm going to smack you with my sword. So just build it however you want and use it as a base for when you create a new piece. Like so, for instance, and you can just... That gives you a lot of help in choosing poses that can be quite challenging. And the fact about thing that is like going in front of each other, like this knee here is what is closest to us on this character, so whatever defines the knee should be on top of everything else. So an example of not doing so could be like just drawing the leg like that. Like, what is going on, right? But if you add the knee, which is the closest to us now, you can see a lot more what it's supposed to be. And that is once again what I talked about before. When things are closer to you, they are on top of other objects. So this entire leg is in front of this one back here because it goes over it. And the same goes for this arm here and the hand, which goes on top of everything. This hand goes behind everything. There's a sword there. Yeah. And this one here is also in front of this one going back. This is back. This is back. This is back. So that should help you like create characters from angles that are hard to pursue, because I imagine this one was a lot of hard work. Definitely shows. So what you could have done to make it more look like she's like jumping at him where we stand is make this leg kind of like go in front of this foot here. So that's something you could have done. Or make the arm go down in front of this leg if it's in front of it, otherwise maybe behind the leg, like I did with the sword hair behind the hair, unless you want the sword to be in front of the hair, of course. So those are some perspective-wise hints, tips, tricks that I can give, especially on this matter, because I actually like that you have, I showed it here, like you have the warp perspective here, right? And just remember that if you have any points in perspective, not all lines are going to be straight, but they can be look very straight and like they're running parallel. without actually really doing it. So I think you got some just by doing that, where we put some things in front of the background, actually help the perspective a lot. And use Design Doll if you have PC, computer. I'm not sure if it works for Mac now, it didn't used to create poses that you would have a hard time otherwise creating from scratch. So that was it. So once again, thanks a lot to crisgvart for your artwork submitted to my Patron. And thank you for being my Patron. I really appreciate it, and congrats for getting into the art course as well. This is an incredibly beautiful piece, and I hope that you can use my constructive criticism and feedback to just anything in the future. And if there's anything about the changes that you guys don't like or just prefer on the old version, that's completely fine. This is seen from my point of view, me as an artist, and I'm definitely not a single voice for all of us out there. So just as a last, this is the original, this is my feedback version. This is the original and my feedback version. Original, feedback version. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and if you'd like to support me, give this video a like. I really appreciate it. It basically tells YouTube that you like the video, and it will suggest the video to other people. And I really hope that you could follow along. As I said, this is the first time I'm doing this, and I will get better the more I do this. So I really hope that you learned something today. That is the main goal of these videos. And if you want more of these videos, they'll be available to my Legend tier on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye!